Funding for Lawmakers comes from
the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, ensuring a better life for Georgians in the 21st century. More than 100 programs of study prepare students for successful careers in the critical professions of education and nursing, as well as business and the liberal arts. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of Georgia's business community, over 4,000 members strong, working with lawmakers for over 90 years to make sure that our state remains a place where companies thrive.
and by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Coming up on Lawmakers, legislation that would impose strict fines for excessive speeding passes the Senate, but without a provision to direct those monies to trauma care. A measure that would have increased the homestead exemption fails to pass the House. And changes in the Georgia 2020 Transportation Act in the House send those bills back to the Senate. Those stories and more are coming up next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers. Here are your anchors, Nwandi Lawson and David Zelski.
Good evening, everyone. Also on tonight's broadcast, a bill that creates the sentence of life without parole for murder passes the House.
And legislation aimed at improving Georgia's graduation rate clears the Senate. But first, our top story tonight, the disagreement over a statewide transportation plan continues. A bill targeting those who drive excessive speeds passed in the Senate, but not without some controversy. And from the House, a compromise is reached on a transportation funding mechanism. Lawmakers Valarie Edwards joins us with an update on both of those measures. Valarie.
David, thank you very much. House Bill 160, the so-called super speeder bill, does two things. One, it increases the cost of getting your driver's license reinstated. And two, drive more than 85 miles an hour on the freeway or more than 75 miles an hour on a two-lane road. And it'll cost you an additional $200 on top of what local authorities charge. $23 million expected to come from so-called super speeders each year is intended to fund trauma care. But the money goes to the general fund. And an attempt by Senator Emanuel Jones to amend the bill and ensure the money is dedicated to trauma care failed after Senator Preston Smith noted such an amendment was unconstitutional. The super speeder bill passed and now heads to the governor for his signature. And the House today approved a bill which lets voters decide in 2010 on a statewide 1-cent transportation tax. The Senate wanted a regional T-SPLOST bill. The House was pushing for a statewide measure. House Majority Leader Jerry Keene said the measure approved today in the House is a, quote, great balance between the two proposals.
So we think it's a great balance and a great compromise, and hope the Senate will join with us and agree, and we can put this issue to bed. I think the measure is the way to go. If you think about it, you'd want to vote on the statewide first anyway, because that solves all the regional problems. But what we're telling our friends across the hall is we sort of agree with you, and if you'll agree with us, we can let the voters decide which measure they would prefer.
Take note, those increased driver's license reinstatement fees go into effect July 1st, and the super speeder fines become effective January 1, 2010. Finally, the T-SPLOST Transportation Funding Measure, Transportation Measure 2020, will likely wind up in conference committee since it appears unlikely the Senate will sign on to the House amendment.
Okay, well, thanks for that report, Valarie.
Thank you, David.
Well, for a second time, a Senate measure that would double the homestead exemption ends up going down in defeat. Representative Edward Lindsey is pushing for the tax reform that would have increased the exemptions by $2,000 by 2012 and then added a cost of living increase in subsequent years. Lindsey told the House that the homestead exemption has not been increased since 1937.
Do we stand with the homeowners of Georgia? Do we finally do what we should have been doing all along, which is gradually increasing the homestead exemption to match inflation, to actually match the changes in home values? Or do we maintain the status quo for our homeowners?
Tax attorney Representative Stacey Abrams challenges the bill as harmful to local government because beyond the $2,000 increase, it provides an annual cost of living increase to the homestead exemption beginning in 2013.
While phased in 2011 and 2012, as of 2013, we'll have an automatic increase every year. It has an additive effect that is also cumulative. And indeed, if you look in the bill, it says that this is in addition to. We are not creating a one-time benefit. We are not creating economic stimulus. We are creating yet another obligation and yet another hit to budgets, specifically to school budgets.
Democratic leader DuBose Porter charges that passage of the bill would be a slap in the face for public education.
This systematic dismantling of funding our public schools has got to stop.
But Appropriations Chair Ben Harbin soundly disagrees.
We spent more money this year on a percentage basis than's ever been spent in a budget. Don't tell me we've cut education, because quite frankly, you don't know what you're talking about.
SB 83 failed by a vote of 109 to 63. After the vote, I asked Representative Lindsey if there was another vehicle by which to pass the measure this year. He confirmed that SB 83 is dead for this session, but he will reintroduce it next year.
Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers took the lead today in passing two tax bills that aim to create jobs in Georgia. He explains the first bill, HB 481, known as the Jobs, Opportunity, and Business Success Act of 2009.
It's about one thing and one thing only: creating jobs in Georgia. I'll briefly go through the bill and be glad to answer any questions. Section 1 establishes a one-year holiday on paying certain fees for creating a new business in Georgia. The next section deals with giving a credit to those who hire someone who is currently receiving unemployment benefits in the state of Georgia. This would give a credit between $25 to $125 per employee based on the Commissioner of the Department of Labor and his view of the stability of the unemployment fund. The next section deals with a very quirky law we have in Georgia that we ought to get rid of immediately, and that is this idea that we collect or pre-collect what are known as sales tax deposits. We know of no other state that is doing this. Right now, the state has on hand $186 million of sales tax deposits that have been pre-funded that the state just simply holds on to in perpetuity and, by the way, earns interest off of. The next section deals with giving a $2,400 tax credit to a company who hires someone who is unemployed and maintains the employment of that person for a period of at least 24 months. And then the final section is an idea that we believe will make Georgia perhaps the most business-friendly state in America, and that is come to Georgia, become a Georgia domiciled corporation, set up shop here, do business, hire people, and we will slowly but surely get rid of the corporate income tax for those companies and corporations that are willing to do that.
Senator Nan Orrock then took the well with documentation from the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute that this money will end up costing the state over $600 million.
This bill would create, optimistically, 2,200 jobs in a state of 9.5 million people. What hit to our state revenues would we experience? Almost $600 million revenue loss. When you do the math, it's not complicated. You won't even have to use a calculator. That means each job created is costing our state budget $265,000.
Folks, this is a very good piece of legislation that does the most important thing we can do up here this year, and that is help Georgians get jobs. We talk about so many other issues, and we have been debating some important issues, but go home and talk to the people you represent. What is the thing they care about right now? Jobs.
HB 481 ended up passing by Senate substitute and now goes back to the House. Senator Rogers then introduced another tax bill, HB 482. This creates a ballot vote to exempt ad valorem taxation for personal property constituting the inventory of a business.
The entire inventory tax collected by the state of Georgia on the quarter mill is about $2 million. This, if the voters approve it, would get rid of that, but the economic benefits from doing that, I suggest, would be at least 100-fold.
And the second bill you just heard, HB 482, passed unopposed with no debate on the floor, and that one now goes to Governor Perdue.
The sentence of life without parole for murder convictions is one step closer to becoming law with the passage in the House today of Senate Bill 13. Representative Rich Golick explained that the new sentence makes more sense than current guidelines.
What this bill seeks to do is to provide for the possibility that a judge will be able, in a situation of a murder charge and a conviction, it will give the judge the ability, not automatically, but it will give the judge the ability to hand down a sentence of life without parole. In a death penalty situation, if there is a finding of guilt in a death penalty situation, but a jury does not find that an aggravating circumstance occurred in the murder, By law right now, the judge is forced to hand down a sentence of life with the possibility of parole. What this bill will do, again, that doesn't make sense. What this bill will do is, even in a situation where there is guilt found, but an aggravating circumstance is not found under our current law, it will provide for the possibility of a sentence of life without parole, whereas right now, the only sentence that is possible is life with parole.
And there was no opposition to SB 13, which passed the House 164-0. Because the House Judiciary Non-Civil Committee made several changes to that bill, it now returns to the Senate. And the House gives final passage to a measure barring registered sex offenders from serving on school boards. Representative Roberta Abdul Salam wondered why Senate Bill 14 only covered those convicted of sex crimes.
Why is this good for school boards and not for other offices and positions?
Well, actually, I did discuss that with the senator, and we came to the conclusion that rather than try to paint with a broad brush on this issue, we would just keep it focused to this one particular kind of office. Perhaps it's something that could be done in the future.
SB 14 passed 161-1 and now requires the governor's signature. The House also approved a Senate substitute to House Bill 71, tightening restrictions on fake ID. That measure also heads to the governor.
19 bills in all passed on the Senate floor today, and the topics varied. Among those, HB 227, explained by Senator Johnny Grant. This allows a few people to leave their address confidential when voting. Senator Grant explains who.
Board of registrars in each of the counties can make the residence address confidential for those people who are under a protective order, a restraining order, or residents of a family violence shelter. This is a problem that came up in our last election where a woman who was basically fearing for her life could not vote because she did not want to reveal what her current address was.
After the passage of HB 227, the Senate passed HB 237. This bill creates more financial aid for adoptive parents. Senator Seth Harp took the well to explain.
This bill is in reaction to the federal adoption of special needs children statute that Congress has passed, and that is a bill that provides federal funding to families who adopt special needs children. And special needs is not only the mentally ill, but children that just because of their age and nature probably would not be adopted. All we do is bring the Georgia statute in compliance with the federal statute. And by so doing, that will allow the state to receive about $32 million in assistance that flows through directly to these families to assist them in the scenario of doing an adoption of one of these children.
Senator Harp was also a key player in the passage of HB 550, a bill which creates a third option for mutual insurance companies to become stockholding insurance companies. Senator Harp led the charge against this legislation last week, but he and Senate Insurance and Labor Committee Chairman Ralph Hudgens found common ground today.
It's Amendment 1, and it says, provided, however, that the insurer may not impose a surrender charge on any policyholder electing to surrender his or her paid-up life insurance policy for its cash value.
This amendment protects the people who have served to themselves this cash paid-up policy. This amendment makes sure that if they get that policy and they don't want to keep it, they get their money.
And HB 550 actually failed last week, was reconsidered, and as you just saw, passed today with little opposition. Another bill of note that passed the Senate today was HB 302. This gives customers the option to call their telecommunications company and have third-party charges blocked from their bill. That bill now goes to the governor's desk.
The House today voted to require security guards and detectives to receive board training and certification prior to licensing. Representative Stephanie Benfield questioned Representative Al Williams about why Senate Bill 162 also changes the bonding requirements for firearms dealers.
It removes the $1,000 surety bond that's required to purchase a firearm for a license for a firearm in Georgia. And it was explained in committee that there are no federal bonding requirements, and so this removes the state requirement.
Isn't it true that regardless of whether it's required by the federal government, we do in the state of Georgia require plenty of surety bonds in cases where it's appropriate? And isn't it further true that in this case, the surety bond would give the state of Georgia some control over whether the firearms dealers were abiding by the law and adhering to certain standards? Isn't that true?
I'm sure because of a distinguished legal career, the lady knows from which she speaks.
SB 162 passed the House 144 to 20. Changes made in committee send that measure back to the Senate. Passage in the House today of a measure giving contract preference to Georgia companies that was preceded with debate about genetically modified food. Representative Bobby Franklin wanted to amend SB 44 to prohibit schools from serving these foods, but Representative Jay Roberts says the amendment was ridiculous.
The amendment deals with those agricultural products and simply states that those agricultural products used for the school breakfast or lunch programs shall not include those foods that have had their DNA genetically modified.
In our school systems, if we take away genetically modified foods, then we're going to take away basically everything that they have to eat. We'll be doing away with breakfast. We'll be doing away with lunch. I mean, when you talk about genetically modified foods, you're talking about a cucumber that's a hybrid seed that's grown out there.
A successful amendment by Representative Tom McCall effectively gutted the Franklin amendment, and it was withdrawn. SB 44 passed 157 to 5 and now goes to the governor.
The children of veterans could soon be an automatic qualifier for the Hope Scholarship. Senator Ross Tolleson presents HB 484 and is followed by Senate Democratic Whip David Edelman, who calls this the best bill of the year.
Here in Georgia, we're very fortunate to have a lot of members of the U.S. military have their residence here, and a lot of people move into our state all the time and bring their children with them that serve our great country. And this bill does one simple thing. It allows a dependent child of military personnel stationed in Georgia on active duty shall be deemed to meet the residency requirements for the Hope Scholarship.
This is a great bill. I think this is probably the best bill all year, with all respect to all the tax bills and carrying on. This is a bill that will benefit real Georgia families who are serving us, our communities, and our country like no other families are.
And as expected, HB 484 passed unopposed and now waits for the governor's signature. Well, we invite you to check out GPB's online resources at gpb.org/lawmakers. Find the latest from GPB's radio news team and watch Lawmakers online. All that and more at gpb.org/lawmakers.
Two bills concerning post-secondary education for high school students are being considered by the General Assembly this session. One was passed by the Senate today, while another remains in committee. Lawmakers Minu Hosseini has been following these bills for us and joins us live from the Capitol with the latest. Minu.
In Wandi, House Bill 149, the Move On When Ready Act, and House Bill 400, the Bridge Act, both aim to help high school students to stay in school by offering post-secondary education opportunities. All this is an attempt to improve high school graduation rates. President Pro Tem Tommy Williams carried HB 149 in the Senate today.
It allows for 11th and 12th graders to move on to college if they feel like they need to. This is really for kids who not finding high school relevant and not participating in a dual or joint enrollment program. The parents decide if they want to put these kids in these programs. It's supported by the governor, the Page GAE, and the Georgia PTA.
The Move On When Ready Act passed by a vote of 48 to 1 and now goes to the governor for his signature. On Monday, the Senate Education and Youth Committee discussed HB 400 at length. Representative Fran Miller described what he thought was most important about this bill.
What we're talking about here is we want kids to have an individual graduation plan. This is about students and keeping them engaged. It's not about systems. It's not about rankings. It's not about money. It's about trying to get kids in the right areas for them so they can go forward and be productive citizens.
The committee postponed voting on HB 400 today, where they further postponed voting indefinitely. So while HB 149, the Move On When Ready Act, is moving on to the governor's desk, the Bridge Act remains in committee. Reporting live, I'm Minu Hosseini for Lawmakers.
Okay, thanks for that report, Minu. Well, Senator Cecil Staton told the House Health and Human Services Committee today that the state has one of the highest trauma death rates in the country. He said his bill, Senate Bill 156, could save hundreds of lives. And Lawmakers Emily Banks was at that meeting and joins us now with the story. Emily.
That's right, David. Senate Bill 156 outlines the Trauma Care Commission's main priorities and links it to the State Office of EMS Trauma. Bill sponsor Senator Staton said he's been working on this bill for months and would like to see hospitals guaranteed sustainable funding for trauma care.
No hospital is going to make the commitment, the ongoing commitment in the financial environment that hospitals are dealing with today. They're just not going to make that commitment on one-time funding. It would be like anyone starting out a business where you had to start your business knowing that many of the people, if not the majority of the people coming to your business, are going to take your product and never be able to pay for it. And you get a subsidy for 1 year, expecting that you're going to keep providing that free service on and on and on indefinitely into the future. No one's going to do that. It just doesn't make sense. So this is step one in my view. It's the reason I have worked on this given it so much time in the last year, is I want people to be comfortable so that we can find the appropriate vehicle for sustainable funding so that we can move this process truly forward.
The committee gave Staton's bill a do-pass recommendation, but not until addressing some key concerns, including how to specifically designate funds to trauma care. The committee approved Representative Fran Miller's amendment to dedicate $250,000 in property tax funds to trauma care. Miller's amendment would require a constitutional amendment, and he said if that would cause the bill to stall in the Ways and Means Committee, he would remove it.
Okay, that's an important issue this year. Thanks a lot, Emily.
Well, in other news, House Bill 23, a bill that bans cell phone and text messaging for drivers under 18, passed the Senate Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee today. Evan Seitz has that story.
The 1997 Teenage and Adult Driver Responsibility Act made many provisions, ranging from how many teenagers could be in the same car to what times of day they could drive. More than 10 years later, HB 23 has set out to amend that act and apply more safety measures to young drivers across Georgia. Bill sponsor Matt Ramsey explains.
The first 6 years the Teen Adult Driving Responsibility Act was in place, there was a 40% reduction in fatalities among 16-year-old drivers. And the whole thrust of that law was to provide young drivers an opportunity, an incubation period, if you will, to learn how to drive relatively absent of distraction.
In this new age of technology, Representative Ramsey is now placing his attention on new ways to protect teen drivers, specifically by eliminating text messaging on cell phones.
Well, now in 2009, we have a gap in the law that I seek to fill. Number one distraction, far and away, study after study shows now for young drivers is cell phone use. Now that we've had the advent of text messaging, it becomes a little scarier every single day. I truly believe this will save lives among our most vulnerable drivers. I think it will reduce the incidence of crashes in our state, and I think it's a good public policy from a safety standpoint.
House Bill 23 received a do-pass recommendation and will now head to the Senate Rules Committee. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Evan Seitz.
The Senate Veterans, Military Affairs, and Homeland Security Committee passed legislation today that would place limits on cash rewards from bingo games held by veteran organizations. Now, since Representative Calvin Smyre, sponsor of House Bill 674, was not able to attend the meeting, Representative Len Walker spoke in his behalf about this issue with the Senate substitution. Lawmakers Tiana Fernandez has more.
I believe Representative Smyre has a concern about the limits that are in the substitute.
The original limitation that passed the House with a vote of 107 to 54 set the cash award limitation at $15,000 a day and $45,000 a week per person. Chairman of the Veterans, Military Affairs, and Homeland Security Committee, Senator John Douglas, felt that these numbers were unreasonable and passed a substitute changing the cash award limitation to $2,500 a day and $5,000 a week. Attorney Les Snyder, who spoke for Bobby Boss with the American Legion, stated that although he agreed with the bill, there needs to be additional legislation that would set limitations for all organizations that hold these bingo games.
I just want to clarify that, yes, if in fact they give out the cash prizes that are put the limits on that you have in there, I realize there's a disagreement between the House and the Senate, but obviously whatever limits you've increased it to at least is better where there is now. There is a competition issue. It's not just outside the state of Georgia. there are military facilities in Georgia that aren't governed by this law, and they award big money for people to come play bingo.
The bill passed the committee by substitute with the limitations set by the Senate, but the chairman says he will attempt to contact Representative Smear before the bill moves to Senate rules. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Tiana Fernandez.
And of course, the sponsor of that bill, Representative Calvin Smyre. In other news, one reproductive rights group is getting a jump start on legislation for next year with guest speaker and women's rights icon Angela Davis. Lawmakers Brittany Evans has the details.
Today, the advocacy group Spark, Reproductive Justice Now, is telling legislators to legislate this. This is their second annual Legislate This Reproductive Justice Now program. It's designed to get conversation started about reproductive policy issues. Angela Davis, a longtime social rights advocate, was the keynote speaker at this year's event. She spoke about the group's focus on females in prison.
If we look at the swirl of issues surrounding women in prison, we get a sense of the connections that link those of us who happen to be inhabiting this free world now and those who are behind bars.
This year, they look to educate the public on the issue of restraining incarcerated pregnant women. The group promotes banning the use of arm, leg, and belly restraints for pregnant and birthing women. Co-executive director Paris Hutchins explained.
Today is one of our first steps forward in a year-long and possibly many-year-long process in introducing legislation on this policy.
Gwendolyn Perkins has lived it. She was pregnant while incarcerated and described her experiences today.
I was shackled to the gurney while I miscarried, and it was just excruciating because I was already miscarrying, and on top of that, shackle.
Spark plans on meeting with legislators over the summer to discuss the anti-shackling legislation. They gave out bookmarks like this today, suggesting ways the public can get involved with the campaign. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Brittany Evans.
Well, coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, more on transportation as a House committee is expected to vote on SB 200, which would create a new state transportation agency. We'll have that story and all the latest news from under the Capitol Dome tomorrow night on Lawmakers at 7 p.m. If you missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, please tune in tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. when Lawmakers repeats here on GPB Television. You can also see this episode of Lawmakers at 7 a.m. on GPB Knowledge. You can keep up with all the action under the Gold Dome daily on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Georgia Gazette. Coming up next year on GPB Television, Georgia Traveler. Imagine that, David. Tonight's episode, coasting along the Atlantic, exploring US 17. Georgia Traveler's coming up next here on GPB.
It is a good one.
I'm sure.
I've seen it. And that is our broadcast for this, the 36th legislative day of the 2009 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm David Zelsky.
And I'm Wandy Lawson. Please join us tomorrow night at 7 for Lawmakers, and have a great evening.
Good night.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.